This is the smallest and most indestructible drone that I have ever owned. I think it goes without saying too that it's also one of the more fun drones that I've flown. So, to show you everything that there is to love and not to love about this drone, I'm out on a tiny little road trip with my tiny drone. Anyways, it's worth noting that my initial setup experience was nothing short of awful, so I'll be making sure to cover that while we're out here today as well. First up, what's there to love about such a tiny drone, you may be wondering? Well, to my initial surprise, quite a lot actually. For starters, the small size helps out with not just the cost of purchasing the drone, but also the cost of repairs and spares. I bought this direct from Beta FPV's website, who were actually kind enough to give me a 50% discount off of it. Still means I paid $105 for it, so don't worry, if there's something that sucks, I'm still gonna tell you. But looking at the full price of this drone, it's only $210, which when compared to a lot of other beginner drones out there, I'd say it's a pretty damn good place to start. I mean, my first drone was the Tiny Hawk 2 Freestyle, which on its own cost $260 and is now a 3-year-old piece of tech. As a general, sure, it's still more than likely a good drone, but for $50 less, you could be buying brand new tech that most likely has more available parts, batteries, and support. So take it as you will, but I think that the price is a damn steal. Pairing up alongside that pricing, I want to touch on the fact this is an ELRS drone. A lot of remote controllers now come with ELRS built in, so the fact that the cheapest version of this drone also comes with ELRS built in as a standard, it's just kind of another money saver. It means for the newer controllers, there's no need for you to purchase a separate ELRS module like I've had to, but do make sure that your controllers actually got it beforehand. Otherwise, if you make the decision, buy the drone and don't have ELRS, it's kind of going to be a crappy outcome for everyone. We're also going to have to touch on this lovely ELRS system and discuss the setup, which has left me with not much good to say about it. But for now, keeping low cost is a recurring theme. Another great example is the batteries. It's more or less $15 per battery, and with each battery you get a similar amount of flight time as to what you would generally get on something like a 5-inch build with a $70 battery. Sure, that is a little bit like comparing apples with oranges, but it's something to keep in mind, especially for anyone looking to, own a cheap drone, but hella fun drone at that. Like, you're getting similar flight time with a comparatively similar flight experience for a fraction of the cost. Now, moving forward, one of the biggest factors for me purchasing this came down to its size, weight, and ability to fly safely indoors or around people. Right now, here in New Zealand, we're in winter, and you can probably tell from the snow behind me, right? So that means for a good few months, we pretty constantly have a temperature of below 0 degrees, and with that comes freezing hands and a not as enjoyable flight experience. A little hack on the side though, is these bad boys. Now, why do I have a couple of mini beanbags stowed in my pockets, you may be wondering? Well, allow me to tell you that these, oh my god, these are godsend. These are hand warmers and they stay warm for about 8 hours, so they're an absolute lifesaver and just live in my pockets. Speaking of what's in my pockets too, having a wee little drone that's this size just lets me be able to rip around literally anywhere, whether that's the backyard while I stay toasty warm inside, and now that I think of it, that's actually a pretty damn convincing offer. But the sheer size of it just, honestly, it amazes me consistently. I feel like I'm actually just able to take it across the road and fly in the park that's local to me, or go and have some fun in public areas that might have a few people here or there. Why? Because no one actually cares about it. If anything, it might actually create an environment that allows me to safely fly nearby to strangers who, I don't know, potentially might see it, pop over and have a positive chat. Who knows, it might just be a stranger's gateway into the hobby. All up though, it's just a really cool little feature about such a small drone, and the fact that it's got prop guards is an added bonus for safety too. These prop guards also help achieve perhaps the second biggest reason to buy this drone, and that's simply the indestructible nature of it. I can't even count the number of times that I've actually crashed, some pretty solid, others upside down, and some just terrible landings, but every damn time this little guy just starts back up and flies as if nothing happened. There's no prop damage, no cracks in the frame, and no puffy batteries either. In fact, barely even a scratch, and that's all thanks to the perfect combination of being lightweight and having a squishy plastic frame. If the drone was any heavier, then this frame would need to be more rigid, and if it was more rigid, it would in turn become heavier. So finding that balance in between the two was critical, and I actually think that they nailed it. I mean, looking at this from a beginner's perspective, this might just be the perfect drone with absolutely no flaws, right? Maybe. Now, before we get to my awful experience, I do want to show you just how well this thing flies and why it's so much damn fun in the first place. This is actually the first ever FPV drone that I've ever had the confidence with to hand launch, and I'm not recommending it, but I'm just saying it's possible. Anyways, if I can try my best to describe how this feels to fly, I'd lean on the side of saying that it's a featherlight drone with decent performance. It's got the punchiness that I want to be able to pull myself out of dives, tricks, or close calls, but you can also very much so tell that the punchiness comes down to the weight of the drone instead of so much the power from the motors. When you're flying around, there's very little weight being pulled around with it, which makes sense. It's a much smaller and lightweight drone, but these are just some of the noticeable flight characteristics that come along with a much smaller drone, especially if you're used to flying something like a 5-inch or even an Avata. All in all though, the analog feed is solid. I haven't had any issues with the connectivity of ELRS since setting up, and everything is working smooth as day, making for a really simple and fun flight experience. Now, although I don't have many flaws or cons to talk about with this drone, I did have a setup experience that left me feeling like a complete idiot, and although I probably do classify as that title, I would hate to have gone through what I did if I had any less knowledge about the hobby, like especially if I was someone just starting out. My bad experience thankfully didn't necessarily come down to the drone itself, instead it was in relation to ELRS, the connection between my remote controller and the drone, but this was my first ever interaction with ELRS, so I made sure to go and watch through JB's 40-minute masterclass before trying to set anything up, which seemed like the right thing to do in order to make sure nothing went wrong. Unfortunately for me, even with that video under my belt, everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong. It took me 4.5 hours of frustration, confusion, and questioning to simply connect my controller to my drone. I literally had to figure out a workaround to all of my problems instead of just solving them. Without going into too much detail, as I've already got a separate video on it, ELRS does not have a good relationship with my MacBook. I ended up having to use my iPhone with the SpeedyB app to get around my issues. So who knows why I have issues? I can only hope that your experience is a walk in the park in comparison. Moving forward though, I've got two more things that I'm just not the biggest fan of. The first is this little battery connector lead. It's just one of those parts that really doesn't feel like over time is gonna hold up and feels like it's gonna be one of the first things to break. I mean, I'm no design expert, but I do feel like there could have definitely been a better way to have, routed the cables so that your battery doesn't run straight over the top of them every time. Because I swear by, every time I put the battery in, I catch myself, getting the wires caught up in between the battery and the frame, and hey, I don't know how long it's gonna last. As of currently though, nothing is broken or even actually showing signs of breaking. It's just, to me, it doesn't inspire a ton of confidence. The second issue I have is in relation to the power of this drone. And this is a little bit of a weird one because it's not really all that bad. It's just, it feels a little bit too powerful for a small indoor space like my living room, and feels a little bit underpowered when you take it out into a massive outdoor space like this. It's definitely got its sweet spot with larger indoor spaces like halls or smaller outdoor spaces that have heaps to do on them like playgrounds. And I mean, neither of those are hard to come by, and I'm sure with more practice I'll be able to fly in tighter areas, but right now, that's just not a possibility without constantly smacking into things. Speaking of flying though, I've managed to get through about 50 batteries with this now, which really isn't a ton of time considering the flights are lasting like 2 to 3 minutes with the current cold climate. But it's still more than enough for me to be able to let you know just who this drone is actually for. You see, I'm able to tell you this because this drone is seriously everything that I wanted when I first started out flying FPV. And the fact that I've just bought it now, 2 years into the hobby, that just goes to show you that it's something that you're not just going to outgrow. Instead, I believe that it's got its specific purposes for particular times and weather, and still has room within it that I feel like I can grow my skills more with. So if you're looking for a first FPV drone, maybe you have a small budget or simply just want something fun to mess around with, I really do think that the Meteor75 Pro is a solid option to go with. I'm currently running the analog version of it, which means you could spec it out more and go for HD0, but at that point, you'll be needing to have a higher budget goggle setup. I don't know, I think the appeal of this drone leans more towards the budget side of the hobby. So if you want to purchase my exact setup, the links are down in the description box below. Otherwise, if building is more your thing, I've got a bunch of mistakes that I made with my first drone build that you can check out here.